Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. We are very excited for this webinar on innovative financing for abandoned mine land, or AML, reclamation. Let's get started. It's about 11 now. Next slide, please. My name is Hannah Zaveri. Lilia Battle and I are currently students at the University of Virginia, and we are working as research fellows for Appalachian Voices and the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition. And we will be facilitating today's webinar. To give you a little bit of context, Lilia and I have been investigating non-grant financing options that the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition could integrate into their project funding strategies for both coal-impacted land cleanup and redevelopment initiatives. And so today we're going to hear from speakers who will introduce innovative funding sources that could be applied to cleanup and redevelopment activities on coal-impacted sites. Next slide, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lelia, and I just want to make sure everyone notes that you can use the chat function or Q&A to post some questions or comments. And at the end of the webinar, we will facilitate a brief Q&A based on these comments. It's also being recorded and will be available to be viewed afterwards. And quickly, thank you to Adam Wells for facilitating the behind the scenes right now, and Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition for all their help with our research over the past few weeks. So Adam, next slide, he's going to introduce the coalition to those of you unfamiliar.
Yeah, and I've been trying to get us into a full screen mode on the viewer, but I'm not that good at multitasking, so I'll keep trying. But yes, hello and welcome. Thanks to everyone joining us as an attendee, and really appreciate all of our panelists joining us today. And a big thanks to Hannah and Lilia for all their great work that they've done through this fellowship. We're really excited to talk about innovative finance on mine reclamation projects. This is a new area for us as a coalition that we're looking to, we're just exploring it and trying to get into it through our projects. A little bit about the coalition. Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition started several years ago with two main goals. One is to get innovative mine reclamation projects, community development projects funded primarily through the Abandoned Mine Land Pilot Fund, has been our main funding source in the past. What this webinar represents is us trying to expand into new funding streams for those projects. So that's goal one, is to get good projects funded on the ground in Central Appalachia. Goal two is to support a community of practice around innovative mine reclamation. And so we do that through hosting webinars like these, as well as managing the coalition website, Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition, or reclaimingappalachia.org, where we've got several reports and other resources available for folks to check out. The coalition is made up of Appalachian Voices in Virginia, Coalfield Development Corporation in West Virginia, Rural Action in Ohio, with support from Downstream Strategies on a regional basis. And then in the past, Appalachian Citizens Law Center in Kentucky has also been a member, but they stepped back in the past year to focus on other work in the space, but are still a friend and trusted thought partner in this work. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Hannah and Lilia, and just say thanks again to everyone for joining us and spending your time with us today.
And to introduce our presenters, first we're going to hear from Jacob Hanna, who is Coalfield's Development Conservation Coordinator. He will introduce Coalfield's Reuse Corridor project, as well as a few of the financing options that they're considering for the project. And then we're going to hear from Rural Action's True Pigments Director of Project Development, Michelle Shively, and Rural Action's Social Enterprise Director, Paul Patton. They're going to provide an overview of a social enterprise that Rural Action recently has launched, True Pigments, as well as some of the funding strategies behind this project.
Yeah, and next we'll hear from Becca Richardson, who's the Director of Project Development at Opportunity Virginia. She's going to talk about opportunity zones and accessing and integrating opportunity zone funds for mine land reclamation projects. Finally, Andrew Crossman is Director of Regional Initiatives with Rural Support Partners and is also working with Invest Appalachia, that's building a regional investment fund. And he's going to introduce Invest Appalachia and their vision for the future of impact investing in the region. So big thanks to all of you for joining us and taking the time to prepare some presentations. Each speaker is going to have 10 minutes, and just a reminder, post any questions in the chat or Q&A and we'll address those at the end. So Jacob, if you want to get started, and Adam, you can go over to the next slide.
Sure thing. As I mentioned before, my name is Jacob Hanna, a conservation coordinator with Coalfield. We are a nonprofit based in Huntington, West Virginia that focuses on community development, personal and professional development, and incubating social enterprises. And so what you've heard the old adage, two negatives make a positive. That's really what the idea of the reuse corridor is all about. Trying to catalyze abandoned assets or liabilities like abandoned mine lands or brownfield sites, and use them as platforms for introducing opportunities for the reuse corridor and reusing materials. So let's jump into it and to the next slide. This graph represents just the overall trend in landfill tonnages throughout the years in America. You can see below, the different colors represent different materials that still have innate value inside of them, like glass and metals, etc., but usually just end up being landfill destined. And of course, this graph is probably not even accurate to today's circumstances, given the closure of the international economies and not receiving these materials any longer. So we have a large surplus of these materials that usually end up creating illegal landfills or illegal dumps, folks dumping materials into the river, and just a lot of pollution in general. And then also the pre-existing landfills are getting overloaded as well. So if you move on to the next slide, it's just another representation of that overall trend. We're seeing organizations like the Recycling Center in Charleston, West Virginia, having to shut down several aspects of their recycling. Other organizations are canceling their composting operations. And so it's an issue that is just now starting to form at its precipice here. And we're really trying to address it before it becomes a larger point of concern for the region. And so if you go to the next slide, it's sort of where we get into diverting from just this traditional idea of waste and landfillism. And instead looking at the idea of reusing materials and having responsible stewardship over our supplies. And this just gives a quick little summary of how we're diverting some of that material. Old scrap wood is being turned into furniture. Old t-shirt textiles are being used as soil retainers for growing mushrooms. And sawdust and food waste is being used to make compost with some of our partners. And this is using a blend of grant funding, also market drivers. And if you go to the next slide too, it's throughout this region here that follows really the Ohio River and Tug River, from Athens, Ohio, down to Huntington, West Virginia, into Pikeville, Kentucky, and soon to be potentially down into Wise County, Virginia as well. So this is a kind of a rural region with clusters throughout. And so that'll come into play later on when we talk about how to aggregate the materials. Next slide. This is just a growing list of our partners. It includes nonprofits, for-profits, social enterprises, development authorities. It takes a whole village to sort of address this issue, because we all contribute to this issue. We all produce what we call waste that can be transformed and extracted the value of those materials into something that can create jobs and help create a diversified economy. Next slide. So how the heck does this all play into abandoned mine lands and brownfield sites? As I mentioned before, this is a rural region with clusters of populations and cities in between. And so those clusters have abandoned mineland sites, abandoned brownfield sites, and this is one of those sites. It's a Black Diamond facility that Coalfield Development acquired, and we have a brownfields grant to transform it into an aggregation hub to collect those reusable materials and divert them, sort them, transform them on site, and deliver them to other partners that are actively looking for those materials as part of their supply chain, whether it's upcycling old computers, reusing plastics to shred to make pelletized materials, whatever it may be. These rural communities need a place for all these materials to come and live at. And so this is just one of those examples. And this is just an inside visualization of how that's coming into fruition for this year with our grant. Next slide. This is an example of the same ideology, except applied to an abandoned mine site up in Morgantown. This is a current application that we're working on to be an aggregation hub for a lot of the food waste from the local university there, some natural refuse from tree cutting companies, and providing a facility for it all to come together and make a fine grade compost product for not only the community to be involved with purchasing and delivering of materials, but also folks coming out of recovery to have an opportunity to get certification in composting and job training opportunities as well. So it's just another example of how this can help catalyze not only the transformation of abandoned minelands, but also the transformation of a newer economy for green collar jobs. Next slide. And this is just a small snapshot example. I apologize, the quality is not showing up as bright as I thought it would, but essentially this is a graphic representing the data from an event that our corridor partners had collaborated on between Marshall University in Huntington, Zero Waste Productions up in Athens, Ohio, and other partners throughout, where it was the Marshall versus OU game, and hundreds, if not thousands, of tailgaters were out, never having any recycling options whatsoever in the past. And so this provided some mobile infrastructure for us to be able to intercept those landfill materials and sort it, aggregate it, and deliver it to the customers who were looking to receive that supply as part of their market supply chain. So a lot of material was saved from landfills or illegal dumps that day, and it was just a really beautiful snapshot into how this collaboration can work not only in a permanent style, but also in non-permanent situations as well. And so in all, that's sort of the idea of that negative and a negative make a positive. We're remediating places to transform products to empower potential in people. So I'll look forward to your questions at the end, and I'll hand it back over.
Thanks so much. Now we're going to hear from our True Pigments representatives. You're both on mute.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michelle Shively. I serve as the Director of Project Development for True Pigments. True Pigments is a social enterprise that is wholly owned by Rural Action, and we've heard a little bit of Rural Action's involvement in some of the other projects already this morning, but Rural Action is a nonprofit based in Appalachian, Ohio, and we work on sustainable economic and community development. And we do that work through working in different sectors. So one of the sectors we've worked in for more than 25 years is watershed restoration. And of course, we all know that the major water quality issue in Southeast Ohio is acid mine drainage. So we spent a lot of time historically trying to clean up these watersheds using federal and state funding, abandoned mine land dollars that were earmarked for that specific purpose. So as we have seen the funding change and go down, we really had to make some changes, which has led us to True Pigments. So Paul Patton is with us this morning too. Paul and I are really heading this project up for Rural Action and moving into business development of True Pigments. Paul's going to jump in a couple slides down the line, so I'll let him introduce himself then. But we can go ahead and move to the next slide. All right, so besides Paul and I, Paul serves as our Director of Social Enterprise at Rural Action, and other partners are Ohio University professors Dr. Guy Riefler and John Sabraw. Dr. Riefler is in the engineering department, and so the innovative technology that we're using at True Pigments was actually created by him in his laboratory over almost 20 years worth of research in the watersheds, and countless undergrad students, graduate student theses. All that work has really led us to where we are, where we can actually put something on the ground at a full-scale facility. John Sobral is an artist, an art professor. You'll see as we move forward that art and paint is a big part of our project, which is maybe not the most logical thing when you're talking about acid mine drainage and abandoned mine land reclamation. You're like, where's that coming from? But John has really helped us improve the quality of the product that we're trying to sell, that we're making from the iron oxide. We're able to make a high quality pigment, and without him on our team, we wouldn't have anything that anyone would actually want to buy. Also, I think that when we're talking about this kind of work, abandoned mine lands, not everyone knows that this is still a problem, that water polluted from 100 years ago, coal mining is still a problem. And if they do know, not everyone thinks, they don't care necessarily. So I think telling the story of this problem and of the need for restoration and reclamation, and then telling the good stories of recovery when the streams come back to life and economic development happens, I think that's really key. And John is a really important piece of our project in telling the story and getting a lot of outside media attention and public attention. We also work really closely with the Ohio, you can move on to the next slide, Adam, thank you. We work closely with the Office of Surface Mining at the federal level, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, their Abandoned Mine Land Program, Ohio EPA, and then local villages, local landowners, property owners. So our big, basically what True Pigments is all about is turning acid mine drainage, turning this major environmental issue into an asset. So that's really what Real Action is all about. I feel like this is the epitome of what we try to do, is focus on what we have, not focus on the problem, and really move forward on asset-based community development. So what we've done is we've actually purchased the largest acid mine drainage discharge in Ohio. Real Action owns it. And we plan to build a full-scale treatment facility that will treat 100% of that discharge. It's going to be, it's about 1,000 gallons per minute consistently that discharge flows. It's actually busted out at an old pumping station back that was sealed in the 60s, but it started discharging at the surface in the 80s. And it's done that consistently ever since then. So every single year, over 2 million pounds of iron oxide is put into Sunday Creek, which is a perennial stream that flows into the Hocking River in southeast Ohio in Athens County. What we're planning to do is capture all of that 2 million pounds and run it through our innovative technology, our facility, and then actually be able to create that high quality pigment that we can sell. And the sales of the pigment are enough that we will actually be able to pay for the water treatment at that site, plus turn a profit and use the money that we brought in there at this site to reclaim and do restoration work at other watershed project sites in southeast Ohio. So we're really excited to move forward with this particular project, just because of the potential, not just for this project, but for additional restoration work that will happen. We also think that this technology, once we show that it works, full scale at this site, we think we'll be able to replicate it at sites all across Central Appalachia. So the potential there for the impact on water quality is pretty exciting. You can go on to the next slide. Just a little bit more about Real Action and kind of where we're coming from and how True Pigments came to be. We were founded in 1991 and really thinking about locally based, sustainable, and inclusive development. So looking at bringing everyone to the table and really thinking about how we can not just do economic development for the short term, but I think all of us here are really looking at that resilient community, resilient economy, and we know that we have to do that ourselves. We have to start that here, have local investment, and really keep that at our forefront. That picture that you see there, that's the day we broke ground on our first Corning highlight. It was a research scale facility where we tested this technology on the ground for the first time. You can see the orange in the background. And now we are breaking ground next week on our second research scale facility at the True Town Discharge. And then next spring, we'll be breaking ground on the full scale facility at True Town. So we've got a lot of exciting things as far as, actually getting the technology on the ground, installing water tanks, and really making sure that we have all our ducks in a row before we start operations at the full scale facility. Adam, I think the next slide is where I'm going to kick this over to Paul.
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you today. So as Michelle said, I'm the Social Enterprise Director at Rural Action. I also work as the Director of Operations for True Pigments. Our model is really a social enterprise model, and I guess I should apologize now because I'm sitting on my outside porch, or my porch, which is my outside office, and we have a rooster that keeps coming to visit me, so I apologize ahead if you hear a call. I'm sure he will, but we really focus in on a social enterprise model, what we call the quadruple bottom line, and that is we're not just interested in generating profits through our business model. We're interested in really helping people, planet, prosperity, and providing purpose. And what we mean by that is to say that when we think about how we can apply business models to making a positive impact in our world, if we keep these four P's in mind, we tend to feel that our business is much more effective. So think in terms of your typical profit model, what we call prosperity, really about the growth of a company using business as a force for good in our communities and in our region. We want to make sure that part of our outputs as a business are to protect the environment for future generations, that part that is planet, nurture those who nurture our business, the people part, and then we want to drive inspiration for the way we work, and that's where we really hone in on purpose. And we think that the intersection of these four goals really is to produce livable, viable, and equitable and meaningful jobs, work, and business principles in our community, which ultimately creates a more sustainable model that's replicable, experiential, and transformational. Next slide, please. So these are an example of some of the pigments that have been collected and then fired, the iron oxide from some of the acid mine drainage discharges throughout the area, and these are the three colors that we have produced so far, and then those are now available through Gamblin Artist Paints as oil colors. You can actually purchase those right now through Rural Action's webpage, as well as a few other distribution locations throughout the country. Of course, the Earth Violet, which is the one there all the way to the right of the screen. And Michelle, I can't remember if the next slide actually shows some of those pigments in paint form. They do, thank you. So you can see here now the Gamblin set, limited edition set on the bottom there that is currently being sold and produced. The monies from that are coming back to, or at least a large portion of those are coming back to help with mine land reclamation. And the process here is essentially we gather that iron oxide up through a lot of work essentially, and dry that out, clean it, and then it is fired at different temperatures to produce different colors. And it has a pretty high stay with respect to the quality of the paint. And as we mentioned, we've been working, because of John Sabraw's work, with Gamblin Paint Company to really produce this set that is essentially the first of what we hope to be many products down the road that we can produce for the purpose of continuing to fund and creating that sustainable social enterprise that will help to clean up these streams and produce jobs in our region. Next slide. So with respect to the business development, as Michelle was saying, and Michelle, feel free to jump in anywhere in here you would like to. We have had a pretty significant capital raise so far of $4.5 million. We've got about the same to still raise before we can be completely operational. And we've been taking a number of marketing sales visits. We were up in New York City before, well, I guess it was the end of last year, meeting with folks from Kaplan, but also some of the local paint companies there, looking at folks who would be interested in taking the pigments that we'll be producing and turning those into different quality and types of paints that they can then sell. We've been working through a land acquisition to actually buy True Town. That was, we used a lot of impact investors for that were interested in getting back low interest rates to no interest rates in some instances, and then just being able to purchase that land and acquire it. So I think we've acquired, are we at 33? We're at more than 33 acres now, I believe, aren't we, Michelle?
Yeah, 48 acres.
48
We're going to sell a
acres.
few of those off, but right now we have 48.
Right. Working with Ohio University on the intellectual property agreements, because the technology was actually produced by Guy Riefler as a professor at Ohio University. We've been working with the university then to develop rights to the intellectual property, and of course developing a stronger business plan so that we can continue to enhance the products that we can offer, as well as make this business long-term sustainable. Next slide, please. Michelle, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. So last year, in November of 2019, our project team was selected as one of the winners of the JMK Innovation Prize. The J.M. Kaplan Fund is a family foundation based in New York City, and every couple of years they have a new cohort of innovators nationwide who are working on projects that are really impactful and are at the point where an investment of money and investment of skills training and connections and that sort of thing, and this cohort experience can really help that project get to the next level. So our True Pigments project was chosen as one of those projects, which was really exciting. As Paul mentioned, we were in New York City last year for as part of the application process and the final decision-making process there, but we also had the opportunity to meet with other innovators and people who are doing all kinds of different work, but all social, environmental impact work. So we're really proud to be part of this experience, and already we've really found that it has helped us jump to the next level. They've been able to help us with some technical assistance things. We've been able to try for other funding opportunities, I think directly as a result of being included in part of this cohort. So that's another exciting thing that we've done in the last year. Adam, you want to go ahead to the next slide. The other thing is just the media attention and the community interest in our project. We want to kind of highlight some of these things. We've been featured locally, on the state level, regionally, and nationally. And then some of John Sabrow's work has even been featured in international art publications, which is also very exciting, that the story of what we're doing here, you know, in the middle of Athens County in Ohio, that story is making it all across the globe. We were featured, our project, the paint was featured in National Geographic in the April issue this year. We've also been talking with a reporter that works for Time, so that hasn't happened yet, but we're expecting that story to show up sometime this year. You know, there's a few other things happening in the world right now that Time is covering, so we understand about that. But I think I want to kind of, this is our last slide, but I wanted to wrap up by saying that I think the innovative, beyond the technology itself, as far as the financing model for this project, the innovation is really coming from using the problem, using the pollutant, and just flipping that on its head and making that the solution. So turning it into something useful, giving it a new life, and being able to actually sell that product and be competitive on the marketplace. There's a huge market for iron oxide, not just in paint, but also in colored concrete, other building materials, industrial coatings, even agricultural fertilizers and cosmetics. And because we can make 3 colors, we really feel like we'll be able to infiltrate the market in a couple different ways. You know, our business plan looks really solid, and that is the plan, you know. So beyond the capital raise and the initial fundraising, that some of it is grants, some of it is the AML pilot funds coming from Ohio. Once we have it built, this project will support itself, which is really, you know, that's a game changer. I've been working on AMD reclamation work for 10 years now in Ohio. We've never had something like this where it could actually pay for itself. So I think that will open the door for treatment at other really, really bad sites, and sites that we haven't been able to treat before. Thank you.
You're up. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Becca Richardson and I'm with Opportunity Virginia. Very quickly, actually, I think it's on the next slide. Let's go forward a slide. I want to just introduce my organization with you. We are this very odd type of, I would call us a public-private partnership, in that we sort of are and we sort of aren't. When the Opportunity Zone program, which is a tax program, which I'll explain a little bit more and hopefully in a not boring way in a moment, when it came about in 2017 as a result of the Jobs Act, Virginia Community Capital, which is a CDFI, a community development financial institution, essentially an impact investing bank, and their subsidiary Locus Impact Investing, which typically helps foundations deploy assets, they got their head around the program a little bit and went to the governor's office in Virginia and said, you know, the state of Virginia is going to have to be designating opportunity zones, which is going to give tax benefits to investors for investing in projects in these places. And Virginia should invest some money to help folks do it right and not take advantage of the program in a way that is harmful to the communities that will be affected. And I'm proud of the state of Virginia. They gave us a $1 million grant. So we are a 4-person team. I'm one of the 4, and we operate within Virginia Community Capital Locus. We're like a department, but we're funded by this grant from, essentially it ended up going through Virginia Housing Development Authority, which is recently renamed Virginia Housing. And we're supported by Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development and the Governor's Office, Secretary of Commerce and Trade. So all of this is to say that the Opportunity Zone program is one in which the complexity of it, and I will get into it, can be difficult for any stakeholder involved. However, with the right amount of support in making projects happen, this is a tool unlike any other that I'm aware of that can get investors who otherwise would never be connected to these kinds of high impact projects, that can get them to the table, and that can supplement their returns in order for the actual businesses and projects not to have to do it in the same way as typical investments. Okay, next slide. I forgot to set my little timer for 10 minutes. All right, so like I said, the Opportunity Zone program is a tax program that came out in 2017. It's a federal program, and now it's really defined and goes through the IRS. What happens is investors who have specifically capital gains get very specific benefits, and I'll tell you about them in a minute, for investing in real estate or business projects in opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are low-income census tracts that have been designated by every state, up to 25% in every state. They've been designated and sort of blessed by Treasury, if you will, on the federal level. And they exist in every state, and Virginia has 212 of them. I can't speak to how many the other states have that are made up, that are reflected in the Appalachian region, but they're all over the place. They're rural, they're urban, and every state is, was charged with finding a good mix of distributing these census tracts, because they're sort of set in stone. So if you have a business or a project that is physically located in one of these opportunity zones, or there are various very technical tax laws that are related, or are serving one of these one or more opportunity zones in a significant way, investors can put their equity into the project, and it can even be a nonprofit project. There are lots of public-private partnerships that are developed in this program, and then you get equity investments that are that diversify the total sources, what I call the capital stack of the project, and don't rely. It makes the project less heavily reliant on grant funding, which can be wonderful. But as we all know, grant funding can sometimes be hard to get. It can sometimes be hard to manage grants administratively, depending on the type of grants you get. So usually grant funding is what tends to catalyze opportunities and movements and projects, but equity investments, like opportunity zone investments, can really make a project go from sort of something that you're imagining or something that is in process of designing to something that is like really on the table that you can make happen. Let's go to the next slide. Because this can get real technical, I want you all to be able to understand and walk away with the very basic benefits that investors get from investing in opportunity zone projects, so that if you determine your project is in an opportunity zone, and I can tell you how to do that at the end of the presentation, but this is how you sort of sell the program to an investor. There are three benefits: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. If an investor has capital gains, now remember, this program is all about capital gains, and the federal government designed it in order for folks to get their capital gains that they realize, whether it be from a sale of a house, a business, a stock, out of their bank account that just sits there, and deployed into communities that need investments. So the short-term benefit, if I have a sale of anything that has appreciation, it results in a capital gain, and I invest it into an opportunity zone project. I get a deferral of the payment of taxes on that capital gain until 2026. So if I did it this year, it would be for 6 years. If I invested $1 million into a project, my capital gain tax rate, I'm just estimating because it's variable, let's say it's 25%. I would owe a tax bill if I didn't invest it into an OZ project or something like it. Really, there isn't anything like it. I would owe a tax bill of $250,000, which is just hard to even fathom. So I would get to defer that money into 2026, which means that I could invest that money as part of my investment and make that money work for longer in the market instead of just paying it as a bill. So that's the short-term benefit, deferring the payment of my tax bill. In 2026, my money is still invested in the OZ project, but I do have to pay that outstanding tax bill. If it was a $250,000 tax bill, I get a 10% reduction if it's been 5 years since I've invested my money in the project. So I saved $25,000 right there. That's probably the smallest benefit, honestly. And then the long-term benefit is, we've already addressed that original capital gain that was invested into an OZ project. Now we're looking at the actual OZ project, and let's just pretend for sake of just fun, because I am so impressed by True Pigments, and I love it so much from that presentation. Thank you to Michelle and Paul. But let's pretend that True Pigments is located in an OZ. And let's say that I invested my $1 million in True Pigments. And after 10 years, if I've kept my money invested in that business, if I have a liquidation event, which means that either the company sells entirely, or maybe I sell my shares back to Michelle and Paul or to someone else, and I have an appreciation, let's say that the business obviously is going to be amazing and it's going to appreciate. So let's say I double the value of my investment and I make another $1 million. I would have another $250,000 tax bill. If this was truly an OZ investment, that tax bill would be fully forgiven. So I would save $250,000 right there, plus my $25,000 that I saved in the medium term on my original tax bill. And this is just the tax side of it. This has nothing to do with the potential earnings otherwise that, distributions over time that maybe the business could produce. Now, keep in mind that these are the selling points to any investor who has capital gains. So as you think about marketing a project, some investors are, as we all know, there's a spectrum of investor types. There are typical investors who want market type returns, and then there are more impact investors. And impact investors have a really hard time finding good projects. And so I emphasize the importance of having that really good pitch deck, like Michelle mentioned, and being able to market something that they can truly look at and analyze, that they don't have to go seeking out information on. But having this extra benefit increases the benefit to the investor without the actual project sponsor having to provide that benefit. So it reduces sort of the type of return that you might have to offer an investor. And if it's a true impact investor, someone who maybe is looking at something like this as opposed to philanthropy, this might be return enough, honestly. So let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, and Becky, you've got about a minute and a half.
I was just going to ask you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so my favorite phrase is capital stacking, y'all, because we are all in rural or Southern America. And I'm from Boston, and I've really adopted the y'all. But capital stacking is essentially just you stack up the money it takes in total to make a project happen. This is a typical capital stack. When you add OZ equity, you've got the state grants, potential local grants. There's going to be a debt component probably. You might have investors who have just regular income, and then you might have investors that can benefit from this program. The OZ part of the capital stack might just be like a gap filler. Or if you've got somebody with a big amount, it could be your lead investor. Let's go to the next slide, and then I'll be finished. We sort of used an example as we spoke, but I pulled AML Renewable Energy Park from the RAC website of the projects that are looking for funding. And I just thought that this park, it's the concept of creating a clean energy hub really anywhere, and using it to develop and utilizing advanced energy technologies to demonstrate ways to produce renewable energy that can contribute to the locality and lower energy costs and contribute in all kinds of different ways, as I've listed here. This type of project, because it is income producing, is an incredible opportunity for an OZ investor if the sponsors choose a site that it is in an opportunity zone, because there could be a public-private partnership. There are just so many different examples of how it could work. And I also wanted to call out for everybody who has any kind of sustainability aspect to their project, adding or looking at PACE financing as an option too. It has to be approved by or passed, an ordinance passed by localities to permit the use of PACE financing, because the debt is tied to the actual land and it lives with that land regardless of the owner. But it's a really great way of getting upfront financing for specific parts of projects, in addition to OZ equity as another element in the capital stack. I know I went over a lot, and the OZ program can be really confusing, but for anybody who wants more information, please let me know, because I will walk through it with you in detail, and I'm also happy to educate groups as necessary.
Thanks, Becca. And just tagging for you, that there's a question for you in the Q&A box that might be involved. If you want to give a quick answer in like type it while Andrew's talking, that might be a good way to at least get started on that question, since we might run out of time at the end.
Oh, you mean like answering it right now real quick?
No, I mean, I think you can respond in the Q&A box.
I will do that right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, well, I will jump right in since we are tight on time, and keep things simple. So my name is Andrew Crossan. I'm presenting today on behalf of Invest Appalachia. And Invest Appalachia is definitely on the financing side of this conversation that we've been talking about here, but very much tied to the types of projects that you heard about from Coalfield Development and Rural Action. And also tangentially related to the opportunity zones that Becca was talking about. So next slide, please. So y'all have heard this phrase several times, impact investment. Invest Appalachia is in the broader field of impact investment, rather. I want to emphasize that it's a really broad field. So it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The commonality is that investors in this space are looking for social and environmental impacts alongside financial returns. So you can see some of the numbers about that field's growth in here. One of the things I really want to emphasize is you heard this phrase from Becca, of market rate returns. So most investors still want their money at a similar rate to what they would get in the stock market or anywhere else. That's called a market rate return. But 1/3 of impact investors, and Invest Appalachia is in this category, are comfortable with below market rate returns, meaning that they want their money back, but they don't necessarily want to be making financial returns, making a lot of interest off of that investment, because they're primarily interested in the impacts. Some of the common areas you can see here, I'll talk more about these. And then lastly, the thing to emphasize is that impact investment is market oriented. So in the examples we heard earlier, which were great examples to illustrate this, there has to be a source of revenue for there to be an impact investment. It has to be able to repay the original investment. So this is just a little bit of a switch for a lot of folks in the nonprofit world. And you've got savvy organizations like Coalfield and Rural Action that have been thinking this way for a long time. There's never going to be enough grant dollars to do all of the work that needs to be done. So where can we find projects, ways to structure projects that can actually pay for themselves through markets? And so that's the whole idea behind impact investment. Next slide, please. So why do we need something like Invest Appalachia? Why do we need a new regional investment fund? There's a lot to unpack here, but very briefly, you all are probably aware that there's a history of wealth extraction and chronic underinvestment in the region, compared with other regions and on a per capita basis. That has contributed to cyclical poverty, broken markets, which means markets that don't function in the way that economics tells us they're supposed to function if they were healthy. But there's also this time-sensitive opportunity for economic transition and diversification. So building new sectors, building more locally owned businesses, building more sustainable enterprises. We also had an external study that documented over $350 million in documented demand for blended capital. And that was for deals that were promising, but that faced a series of common roadblocks and bottlenecks when it came to putting together the actual capital stack, to use Becca's term, to make the deal work. We've also got this incredible infrastructure in the region already. There are lenders all over the region that are focused on community wealth building. There are foundations that are thinking outside the box. There are nonprofits like the ones you've heard from today. They're all doing great work, but there are gaps between them that need to be bridged. There are things that none of those actors can do within the constraints of how their organizations are structured. So that's where Invest Appalachia comes in. Next slide, please. So one of the most important things about Invest Appalachia is that we're trying to build on what works. We're not trying to replace anything, do anything unnecessary or duplicative or competitive. So we really want to build on what already works. We've got some founding values that you can see here. Those guide the whole process of developing Invest Appalachia, and they're also in the organizational bylaws. So really everything that Invest Appalachia does has to follow these principles. As I said, we really want to leverage what already exists. So the grant making by foundations in the region and finance from CDFIs, as well as public sector investments. We also want to build on the infrastructure in the region. So there's some incredible networks of organizations around the region focused on different sectors, different types of organizations, building capacity in community with incredible trust and relationships. We need to build on that. That's one of our region's greatest assets and is a real foundation for any regional scale work. And then Invest Appalachia's specific role, I mentioned some of those common bottlenecks and barriers that deals run into. We want to address those pinch points, and we want to address them through blended capital investment. And I'll talk more about what blended capital actually means. Invest Appalachia is also trying to think bigger than individual transactions. So while a lot of, including impact investing funds, are just thinking about deals. Is that a good deal? Then yes, let's do it. Invest Appalachia is thinking about systems level transformation. So really thinking in terms of an entire sector. So what is a cluster of deals that can really transform a sector and help that sector be a driver of regional prosperity and to really strengthen a key market in the region. So thinking beyond individual deals. And then lastly, at the end of the day, our region needs more capital. We need more money flowing into the region. Invest Appalachia can help with that by positioning itself to attract investment from a broad range of investors all over the country and world, and that can channel money into the region that otherwise never would have reached the ground. Next slide, please. So this has been a long process. I'm not going to go through every step here, but this started almost 4 years ago with the first sort of community conversations. And then there was a long research and exploratory phase, and then a design phase. And we're currently in the phase of formalizing and launching the actual entity of Invest Appalachia. This is just to emphasize what a participatory, collaborative process it has been and will continue to be. Next slide. So as I mentioned, very collaborative design process. Invest Appalachia is also meant to be a regionally representative organization. This is the region that Invest Appalachia covers and what we define as Central Appalachia. It is a 6-state region, everything within that red circle, although not Pennsylvania, we include a little bit of that in the diagram. As I mentioned, over 50 regional and local organizations involved in the process. We've also spent a lot of time in conversation with national experts and organizations to make sure that we're using best practices and really staying on the cutting edge of the community investment space. We've also taken care to be strategically aligned with some of the key regional networks and actors. So those with the regional footprint, including the Appalachia Funders Network, ARC, the Central Appalachian Networks, and many others. And then lastly, Invest Appalachia should reflect the region. It should reflect the region's stakeholders and the types of communities that we're trying to serve. And so the board is inclusive of all types of folks, all types of organizations, funders, community development, nonprofits, very locally rooted organizations, housing, community housing developers, community lenders, social enterprises, like some of those you've heard from today, and private sector business leaders. And then Invest Appalachia is not trying to build a big new model, so it's really keeping things lean, and there will be a community advisory council of community representatives that help to shape the investment priorities. Next slide. So when I say blended capital, what does that actually mean? When we say blended capital, it could be a capital stack like what Becca was talking about, or it could be sequenced capital. So part of that is investment capital. This is generally going to take the form of loans. They'll be below market rate, so there'll be a lower interest rate than what you could get elsewhere, but they have to be paid back. The other form is catalytic capital or philanthropic capital. That's deployed as grants. So it doesn't have to be paid back, but it is directly tied to investment. So it's meant to advance deals that are stuck for some other reason, and that could look like technical assistance, it could look like a loan loss reserve, it could look like a planning and capacity building grant to the organization doing the lead work. You heard about all the work that went into True Pigments that Rural Action had to do before this was a viable deal. That requires some grant dollars, even though ultimately the investment will pay for itself. And actually those numbers are switched. So Invest Appalachia's model has 70% investment capital, which is money that has to be paid back, and 30% catalytic capital, which is grant dollars to free up transactions. And if you look at this funnel, sort of gives you an idea of how we envision this catalytic capital, these flexible grant dollars, unlocking investments, unlocking transactions that wouldn't be possible otherwise, whether that's through sequenced or stacked capital. Next slide, please. Invest Appalachia has defined 4 priority sectors. And so this is where the connection to AML comes in. AML could fit into a number of these, but we have it noted here in the clean energy space. So these are sectors where we think there is massive importance for the region, cultural, economic, environmental importance, but also market opportunities. So these are markets that are really promising or showing a lot of signs of potential and just need more investment. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip through this one real quickly, but this is just if you wanted a breakdown of what the numbers are actually going to look like and the ways that we imagine the money being spent. This is what we have so far. These are just projections, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Next slide. Next slide. This is an example of what a batch looked like. So I talked about clusters of deals. So the idea would be that there would be a batch of clean energy deals. So in this case, it's solar finance on mine lands. And this is one example that's a real life example, which is the Mineral Gap Data Center in Wise County, Virginia, which Voices and others have been heavily involved in. This is an example of how Invest Appalachia would plug in. So if you're looking at that center column there, there might already be a little over $2 million in investment from a lender that needs their money back. Invest Appalachia could come in and put in some more risky money into that deal. So that would be the first money that would be lost if the deal didn't go through. And then Invest Appalachia could also provide a loan loss reserve, which would be money that only gets paid out if some of the other debt can't be repaid. And then, as we heard from some of the other examples, you also sometimes need a good chunk of grant dollars to get things started. So in this case, that would be an AML pilot grant, what we've heard about. Next slide. Last slide here, just to emphasize, again, beyond individual transactions, every transaction that Invest Appalachia does, every strategy should be connecting to the existing work in the region, should be leveraging the capacity and infrastructure that we already have, should be lifting up Invest Appalachia's profile and accessibility in the eyes of national investors, should be increasing the number of funders that see themselves as impact investors and are willing to think differently about how they invest their money. And then lastly, building the pipeline, building investment capacity, strengthening the overall investment system across the region, one deal at a time, by making sure everything is connected and working towards this big picture goal. So that's all I've got from Invest Appalachia.
Thank you all so much for sharing today. We're running short on time, so if any other questions come up, we will share them via email for the panelists to respond if they're able. Hannah and I posted a short document that kind of compiled the research we've done over the past few weeks, and it is available on the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition's website under the Funding Sources tab. So check it out if you want to see more about what we've done.
Yeah,
Adam, anything?
Oh, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming and to all the presenters, as well as to Adam for facilitating the slides and all of that. But yeah, thank you. And Adam, did you want to add anything?
I think y'all said it. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.